You'd like to actually see, I guess, legislated requirements in terms of the reporting outside of what they're required to in terms of the charitable charities, in terms of what they have to report in terms of their charity work. But would you like to see a more prescribed list legislated in terms of their enforcement activities?
Absolutely. I think Animal Care Australia would certainly like to see it absolutely delineated what money they spent on inspectorate functions, on compliance and enforcement, including exactly how much was donated, or not donated, were grants from government for that aspect of their operation, and what were grants for their charitable functions, so that you guys can all see quite plainly how much it actually costs RSPCA to enforce the laws that this state's put in place. Because at the moment, we've got no idea when we look at their reports, and I'm sure none of the committee has any idea really either. So it's very difficult to answer the questions that we're talking about that Emma's sort of alluded to. You know, even if you were to set up this animal welfare office that she's talking about, or in our view, we're saying, you know, take away the inspectorate functions and some of that goes to DPI. You know, how much money do we need to do that? You know, how much money are people that are donating in good faith to the RSPCA? How much of that is going to give somebody an on-the-spot, you know, to enable the RSPCA to give someone an on-the-spot fine because their fence wasn't high enough or something, or they didn't, you know, the vet's phone number was on the fridge when it should have been on the cupboard, or, you know, this sort of nonsense that's gone on in the last 12 months. So it does make sense to have that absolutely delineated.
Can I just turn to your supplementary submission that you've given us today on page 64? It's a fairly concerning letter regarding RSPCA essentially refusing to engage with the local vet where they were receiving treatment from. The animal was seized. The owner said, can we take it to the local vet? They're already under treatment. And they basically held him for 60 days, didn't give him any information. Like, for context, how many complaints like this has ACA received? Is this a one-off, or is this...
No, that's not a one-off, Chair. It's usually it's a common occurrence when we do receive a complaint. Most of those complaints include where those animals are already under veterinary care or under veterinary treatment.
And my last question before unless you were going to add something.
Yeah, we included that particular case because that happens to be one where a member of our committee knows the person, and I have some friends who know the person personally, so we were sort of willing to guarantee that one. Whereas, to be fair, some other cases that we get, and I think Michael said that in the covering letter to the supplementary, there are many that we get where you don't know whether it's somebody, you know, bad blood or you know, what the reality is. We did initially in fact prior to Animal Care Australia forming, I think in another role that Mike and I had, we were meeting with RSPCA New South Wales on a regular basis, and that did sort out quite a number of those in their defence. Then we had a disagreement. I won't go into the details of why, and basically RSPCA New South Wales said to us, well, you're either for us or you're against us, and we said, well, we're neither for you or against you. We're trying to, you know, work with you, and all appointments were cancelled, and to be honest, we've not had a decent conversation with them since, which is very disappointing, and I guess that and these sort of cases have all led us to where we are today, where we're saying we're kind of biting the bullet and saying, look, it's probably enough's enough. There's enough evidence in our view that RSPCA needs to be cut loose from its inspectorate functions. There's too much evidence showing that they're compromised in terms of activism. There's too much. I mean, the oversight problem is a legislative problem. I get that, and whatever happens next, you know, there does need to be oversight for whoever it is that's doing it. I mean, you know, as I said, they're not willing to collaborate. The education of their officers it's got problems. You know, there's a range of issues that have all culminated in us, you know, in Michael's opening statement to sort of recommend, I guess, to this committee now that probably enough's enough, and given it's happening in other states, that we'd ask the committee to seriously consider whether, not AWL, whether RSPCA New South Wales should any longer be a compliance be given inspectorate functions under the new Act.
Before I go to Ms. Blythe, I just wanted to pick up on that point you just made, that, and I note in the submission you say that you don't share the same views of Animal Welfare League. So if I could put it another way, what is Animal Welfare League doing better than RSPCA at the moment in terms of that inspectorate role?
The very thing that Ms Hurst just asked with the previous questions. They're educating first before they're regulating. They are actually putting the welfare of the animals first, not the goal of improving statistics.
Ms Boyd?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of quick points of clarification for ACA, if I may, and then I've got a question for all of the panellists. In your original submission, you've got a sort of a dot point of, or a checklist of points. The two last ones, so the second last one talks about prosecutorial powers being removed from the RSPCA New South Wales, and you've put in brackets, as it has in other states. To my knowledge, the RSPCA still has prosecutorial powers in every state and territory, with perhaps the exception of the Northern Territory. What are you referring to there?
Okay, in the ACT, it's actually the DPP who actually carry out the actual prosecutions, and in Western Australia, it's actually their agricultural department that actually decide and carry out or approve prosecutions. I'm aware that under the current animal welfare review in Queensland, the same will be occurring in Queensland, that it'll be their agricultural department that will make those decisions and continue with that prosecution.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify though, in ACT and WA, that's not a removal of prosecutorial powers?
The WA's
was always that way?
No, the WA's was a removal back in 2019. The WA government actually very quietly just took it away, didn't announce it, didn't do anything publicly on that, and just changed the protocol within how they function.
And then the one underneath that, the point underneath that, you say that the approved organisations tasked with enforcing the legislation must meet the same court-required burden of proof as the New South Wales Police Force. As a matter of law, the burden of proof would be the same regardless of who was bringing the prosecution. What did you mean by that point?
What we're actually asking for there is that under the draft Animal Welfare Act, there are certain sections which we've quoted in our submission that actually would provide for an inspector to utilise the courts to achieve a certain goal without relying on that burden of proof, or providing that person who's potentially being prosecuted with the opportunity to respond, defend, or even receive a fair trial.
So the
Sorry to interrupt. There's also some other issues in terms of the way that when animals are seized. So there's quite a number of cases that we hear where the reason that people don't defend themselves is because their legal advice, and understandably, is that this animal's going to be kept and seized for 6 to 12 months or however long the court process takes, and the amount that you're going to be up for to pay for the housing of that animal far exceeds the fine, what you're going to get in court. So in other words, people plead guilty. So I'm not. I know you're in the other inquiry on animal. So we've sort of recommended that the state needs to take on the cost involved in that, so that we can have a fair due process, so that people defend their own innocence,
but the
rather
point
than
there then
plead guilty.
is the way that the particular powers are drafted, not that if the New South Wales Police Force was to be doing the same things under those provisions, that it would be subject to a higher level of burden of proof.
No, that's not what we're trying to say.
No, it's perhaps a higher level of scrutiny.
Thank you.
A higher level of scrutiny that the police force.
And so my final question then is to all of you. Given that we have a situation, as Ms Hurst said, quite a bizarre situation where we have certain crimes relating to animals only being enforceable by private individuals, by private charities, why do we just stop at these two, and should we instead be opening up the ability to prosecute to all private individuals and groups? I'll start with you first, Ms Vesk.
I think that there are ways that that's managed so that it doesn't, the courts aren't burdened with, vexatious matters. And if that issue is just a citizen right, rather than extending it to other charities, then I'd support it. I think as things stand, those two charities currently, their teams of inspectors are well trained and experienced in investigations. But I take your point, and I don't disagree that it it ought not be impossible for a person to bring a private prosecution.
Thank you. Mr Davis or Ms Donnelly?
I completely disagree. I would not want to see any other third parties being able to prosecute. We already have enough issues with 2 charitable organisations doing it, let alone opening that up to any other ideological group or anything else trying to prosecute, or potentially anybody like a neighbour who has a vendetta against their neighbour being able to attempt to prosecute either. I mean, all of those things are different options that would potentially, in your question, potentially be viable. I don't think that should be the case.
Thank you. Ms Ward?
The Animal Defender's Office is on record supporting returning to a position where there were public prosecutions were available. This was the position prior to, I think, 2007 under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. It is also the position in other jurisdictions currently, including the ACT and at least 3 other jurisdictions where public prosecutions are possible. When public prosecutions were possible under Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, we had some very important cases that actually tested and developed the law, animal welfare law. Bringing a case the first case that was based on the psychological suffering of a circus wild animal held captive at the circus. So that was an extremely, and to this day is cited as a precedent for various issues under animal welfare laws. Public prosecutions is the default position under the Criminal Procedure Act 1986 in New South Wales. So it certainly wouldn't be anything radical if we were to return to that under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act in New South Wales.
Thank you.
Can I correct something here? Both of our people either side of us here have actually referred to it as the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. As from this point moving forward, it isn't. It's actually the Animal Welfare Act.
Not in place yet, though.
I realise it's not in place.
No draft legislation has been introduced to the Parliament, as
I'm
far
aware
as
of
I'm
that,
aware.
but my point being, we shouldn't be focused on the prevention of cruelty solely. It's actually an Animal Welfare Act. It should be all about animal welfare, not just the prevention of cruelty to animals. Yes, ICA wants to see the prevention of cruelty to animals stopped, and constantly we should be looking to improve and find ways of improving the animal welfare, not just about preventing animal cruelty, but improving animal welfare as well, if I may.
Thank you. Mr Barrett?
Mr Donnelly, I sort of look to you for nod that I'm paraphrasing correctly, but you'd like to see the prosecution powers mirror what they do in WA and Queensland, where they sit with the department. In those 2 states, I'm guessing it'd be the bulk of our animals, definitely our livestock animals anyhow. Do I infer from that then also you don't have a concern about any conflict of interest with those powers sitting in those departments?
We don't have the conflict of interest concerns as long as all of the other measures that we've put in play in our submission of accountability and transparency and all that are actually implemented. No, we would not. If there are the appropriate appeals processes in place, etc., then that conflict of interest could very easily be dealt with, very easily.
And I think that sort of transparency and oversight exists by its very nature within departments like the Department of Primary Industries, whilst it doesn't exist at all, as far as we can tell, within the charitable organisations. So a lot of the issues that we've got here in terms of, the Ombudsman being able to deal with things and the GIPA Act and all the rest of it, all that sort of stuff solves itself if it's, obviously an animal welfare department within New South Wales DPI, as we have now. And we have complete faith in Kim Filmer, the current Chief Animal Welfare Officer, to do a good job in that respect.
Do you have any questions on Mr Primrose?
In a couple of minutes, if I could. First of all, can I just say I was the one posing the questions around education this morning, and I wasn't in any way inferring that you should reduce the compliance activities by having education. I was actually talking about a deliberate funding stream above and beyond that is what I was actually saying.
I wasn't referring to those questions.
And so, just to make that clear, what we're talking about here with the GIPA Act is actually what they call follow the dollar legislation. So there's been discussion before at previous inquiries around Animal Welfare League and the RSPCA having to comply with GIPA provisions because they receive government dollars. Now, it is a bit unusual in that in other areas, if you receive the disability field, you receive government dollars, you're actually not always required to meet follow the dollar type legislation. So essentially what I gather here is there is an issue, because it's been raised with me again, that around people applying under GIPA for information from both AWL and RSPCA. And I probably Ms Ward, you, in your organisation's probably more than the others, but I could be wrong about that. Do you still continue, because Mr Coleman, I think at one of the inquiries actually said that they do comply. Do you still have issues around accessing information under the GIPA Act as it relates to the RSPCA and Animal Welfare League? And I'll ask the other panellists too, but I want Ms Ward first.
Thank you. We have just put in, following on from the evidence provided at a previous inquiry, and it was certainly news to us, that the RSPCA considers itself to be subject to freedom of information laws. So following on from that, we have actually just put in our first request, and so unfortunately that is just happening now. So we will certainly see how that goes. But in the past, outside of that framework, we have had absolutely no luck in getting any information from the organisation as to why matters where we have put in detailed complaints do not proceed.
I'll just add, in terms of GIPA, I think there's a difficulty for RSPCA or AWL, I guess, determining what information is it that's subject to GIPA and what isn't, because when does an investigation become an investigation under POCTA and when does it become, an animal welfare thing? So there's difficulties there that we've discussed with government staff in the past. But on the Ombudsman issue, we have had advice from the New South Wales Ombudsman that yes, people can put in a complaint for those public functions. I asked for statistics, and I've spoken to people in the Ombudsman's office only in recent days, and the reality is nobody, I don't think, ever has. There's a couple of complaints in their annual reports, 40 out of 6,000 odd that aren't classified as anything, so it is possible. And, I guess they could go and troll through them. But the reality is the public's completely unaware that option's open to them. And in any case, certainly the Ombudsman's office would not investigate an individual complaint. It would only be if there was a whole stack of them that they would then, start to investigate. And at this point, clearly that's not the case. I think probably because the public doesn't know that they can do that.
And if I could answer your question, Mr Veitch, during our preparation for the upcoming puppy farm task force, we actually approached the RSPCA for the statistics from the puppy farm task force, and we were informed that information, albeit being publicly funded, was not available to the public. And we were informed that we would need to find that information elsewhere. It would not be available to us via a GIPA request, despite me stating I would be happy or prepared to provide or lodge one. We went to the Department of Primary Industries and referred us back to the RSPCA for that information. We ended up actually having to find those statistics thanks to you kind people who asked the questions during budget estimates.
Ms Vesk?
Oh, we've had no need to seek information, so it's not really applicable.
I'm conscious now we're just a little bit over time, but thank you very much.
Can I just, I apologise, I just wanted to correct the record in response to a question asked by Ms Boyd. I referred to public prosecutions. I think I meant private prosecutions, if I could just correct that. I apologise, thanks.
No problems at all. All right, so that concludes our session with you. I do believe you may have taken some questions on notice, but if you have, the committee secretariat will be in touch and you'll have 21 days. But once again, thank you for coming in, particularly given it's 2 weeks in a row we've now seen each other in some capacity. All right, so we'll now bring in our